Welcome to Unlearn the Crap and Level Up, Your Soul is Calling podcast. I'm your host, Kathy Baldwin, and this is Beyond the Interview, a special segment of the show. Sometimes the most powerful moments don't happen on the mic, they happen behind the scenes. This is where I share what came up after the interview, whether it's a deeper truth from the guest, a personal reflection from me, or a revelation that hit days later. Here we connect the dots between what was said and what was really going on behind the surface. Let's go beyond the interview. Welcome to Unlearn the Crap and Level Up, Your Soul is Calling. My name is Kathy Baldwin. I'm your host. Today is a special segment of Beyond the Interview. Today is different because this whole week I have allowed the universe to guide me. None of what was pre-programmed for this week is happening, and I am just going with the flow, which is part of what I talk about in Unlearn the Crap. Usually beyond the interview is my thoughts, my feelings, my experiences, my perspective of what was brought up through the interview. All of that is different today. Also, Beyond the Interview usually gets aired quite some time after the original interview. Again, not this week. This week began with my archetype series, and today's episode on Monday, this week's archetype series was about the rejected feminine. The next episode that followed was Kathy Unplugged, where I talked about Mother's Day and the history of Mother's Day and how I unlearned the crap about societal expectations. Last week, I interviewed Dr.BradMontagne. And to be quite transparent, there were some things that were said that I went into one of my own pre-programming, my own condition responses and automatic programming. I went into the good girl, which is part of what crap is that I'll probably spend a lifetime unlearning. So when Brad said something and I was hosting him, part of what I had been taught is that I was always to make the guests feel comfortable. But that is not what Unlearn the Crap is about. Unlearn the Crap is about challenging the status quo, about being in alignment with your thoughts, feelings, and beliefs, regardless of what is happening outside of there. Originally, I had told Dr. Brad that I was going to address some of the things that came up in our interview that I felt I needed to clarify because I didn't put my thoughts, feelings, opinions into it. And so I didn't feel it was fairly balanced. I'm so honored that Dr. Brad said, may we have this conversation together? This is an example of how we can come together with different perspectives, different beliefs, different backgrounds, and not necessarily to make one right and the other wrong, but for us to articulate and challenge the status quo so that you, the listener, or the watcher of this conversation can articulate your own thoughts by having status quo challenged. Thank you, Dr. Brad, for coming back and having this conversation. Our full interview will air the day after this, but I wanted to have this one come first so that we could challenge some of the things that were brought up.
Well, I'm honored to be here. I really am. And This will be our third conversation. They're always quite dynamic. There is, we cover a lot of different subjects, and it's an interesting thing with what you just said. I'll add this to it. I've learned throughout the years that there we commonly think the only way we can get along is have the same belief system, and that's not true. The reality is when someone has a process that's respectable, that's logical, that makes sense, all cultures throughout time, that's how they would discourse things. It's interesting how some cultures, they'll get together, like a Jewish culture gets together, and they have a collective discussion, and it's really dynamic. You would think if you weren't Jewish that they're all angry and really getting at each other, but they'll have these huge extracted conversations to come to collective consensus in the end on what an idea is. But that doesn't have to be the case. The case, when I learned this throughout life, the reality is we have to respect people who have respectable processes in place, and we don't have to completely agree with them, but the way that they process and what they present, that's what's respectable, and that's what we should really base our interactions on.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for saying that.
Yeah.
Now, let's get into it.
Okay.
So, one of the things that you said was that a woman was born to be a mother, that was part of her natural purpose. I disagree in so many different ways. Unlearning the crap is about personal alignment. It is about choosing where our individual zone of genius, our gifts, our purpose, our dreams are. Culturally, we were taught that we had this patriarchal family unit that had a father, a mother, and 2.5 children. And in North America, it always included the single detached home with a white picket fence. That
And
was
that home was usually yellow too, with white trim.
I didn't know the yellow part, but the white picket fence stuck with me. That is an ideal that a lot of people still strive towards, but it's not necessarily what everyone does. You had made a comment that the majority of women wanted to have children, and if they did not have that want or that desire to have children, that there was something within their biology, physiology, hormones that was off kilter. Did I capture your essence correctly?
That's the way it was conveyed, and that's not accurate, and we should have clarified that at that point. When you look at some of the studies that are there, 75% of the women polled said that they wanted to have children, but they felt like there were reasons why they could not. And some of that has to do with societal issues. You look at dysfunctional upbringings, you look at abuse, you look at society's views. A lot of women didn't feel they could voice that publicly, they could privately when asked. And when you look at some cultural things, I've reflected on that statement. When we look at one biblical statement, I think it clarifies this a little bit better. Paul, in one of his epistles, he talks about eunuchs, and he makes this statement: some are born eunuchs, some are made into eunuchs by man, and some are made into eunuchs by God. And when we look at that from what I said before, we can clarify that in a couple of different things. One, we'll take the gender off of a eunuch and just say not able to procreate. And that way it makes it more equal for men and women. Some people are born where there's something wrong and they can't conceive, even though they try. And I've worked with a fair amount of couples where there's reasons why that is, and it's not always one or the other. It's something that comes together. There's a chemistry that has to be right, and that may not balance in some couples. Some it's some societal pressures will bring us into that way. And as I said before, you look at family dysfunctions. I myself, I grew up in extreme dysfunction, just extreme. And you had absolutely no barometer of what healthy relationships were. I mean, it was extremely bad. And you see a fair amount, male and female, grow up in those where there's a lot of abuse, and that takes it away. But when you look at these societal views on what traditional roles are, not everybody fits those. And that's what Paul's talking about. We can't plug everybody into a box and say, okay, you're a person isn't any more of a woman if she has children or doesn't have children. That's not what really makes a woman. The ability, the physiology, the biology is usually typically there for her to be able to, but it's not every woman's desire to do that. And it's not that a woman is less of a woman if she doesn't, and it's not a woman is more of a woman if she does. She's still a woman. And there's things that are extremely, we get off in these hyper ideas of like a hyper feminism, a hyper masculinity, and not many people, I think, on either side really fit into those. There's another passage that's really interesting. It's a simple phrase, and it basically states, "Do not judge unless you be judged yourself, of the same measure." And when we look at that in the society that statement was made of, have you ever been down to Mexico?
Yes, I've lived there.
Oh, okay. You look at the plazas that are set up in cultures like that. They're more traditional of ancient societies over in Europe and other places in the world. And they're set up as a square so that there's big open space down below, and there may be planters and other things, but they're set up in part, not wholly, but in part, so that young people could come together, interact in court, and there are seating places up high around on the outside edges of that where parents and adults could oversee that and make sure that everything was really good. And what that passage is talking about is sitting up in one of those high places, not knowing anything about the individuals on what's going on, and making stereotypical judgments. And that is something that we all do, we can try really hard not to, but there's just some. I got asked this at one point in time, and somebody asked me, "Are you prejudiced at all?" And this was in a prison setting. I got a lot of years of prison ministry under my belt, and my statement kind of set the guard off. It was a female and said, "Well, everybody is to some extent. We just don't always know what that is until we're confronted with the situation. Then it's like, oh my, I didn't realize it was there." And we get the same way with these stereotypical judgments. We can endeavor to not do them, but because of ignorance, because of belief systems, we commonly project that. And this dialogue is one of those where we can look down and go, okay, that statement wasn't real accurate. It wasn't real accurate. What I'm conveying now is more of a right, corrected view of the whole thing. And it wasn't an intention to make a stereotypical judgment. We were talking about a whole bunch of different dynamics with all that. And what I stated was should have followed with a study. It should have included what I'm talking about right now, because that brings it into a balance. You go, okay, this isn't some bigot pointing fingers and pronouncing judgment on women at all. You're just looking from a different perspective. And I didn't state it right. I didn't state it clearly to clarify that.
I appreciate that. And at the point of this conversation, when this came up, we were trying to get to the root cause of the way our body works so that people could identify what was happening within their own bodies. And so we were talking about the chemical reactions that happen within creation and procreation. And that's where that came out of. But I want to clarify, because Unlearn the Crap is about that while it is the woman who carries the child, it is a male and a female, a sperm and an egg that creates. That is the physical manifestation of co-creation. But every one of us, while we have the capacity to procreate, we have the capacity to co-create anything. And while we're in our evolution and we are rising up and we are leveling up into the next best version of ourselves, we get to choose not to follow along with the way things have always been, with those standard memes. There was research done by Pew Research in 2021, and it said 44% of US non-parents aged 18 to 49 don't expect that they are going to have children. And the number one reason they stated was because they just didn't want them. And as I was thinking about this conversation, it tied for me into the Roe versus Wade conversation, the pro-life, pro-choice conversation, the personal empowerment, because part of the ancestral traumas that come about are through unhealed traumas and procreation that continued and perpetuated that along. I believe that my role in my life is to be a change maker. It is to draw the line in the sand that says all of the ancestral traumas that I have inherited end with me, and I will be the one that heals them. I don't know, even though I have two beautiful adult children and two gorgeous grandsons, I don't know if I would have chosen motherhood, if I had have already done my healing journey. Because when I think about where I belong and where I fit into my own journey, did I go along with the status quo and have children because it was expected of me? That motherhood was part of the shoulds that I had. Did that result in my having my breakdown in order to have my breakthrough, to find out who I actually am and where my dreams and where I belong? Because part of what I believe that I was put on this earth to do is to bring my voice to the world, to challenge the status quo, to help people unlearn the disempowerment that has taken them away from themselves. And so our conversation, when it happened, which again, the full interview is going to air tomorrow with Dr. BradMontagne, and I want you to go and hear it, because while this is a small snippet of what that interview was, this was the part that I betrayed myself by not challenging you at that moment.
Yeah, and it's good to be able to bring this full circle, to open that challenge, to have a dialogue, and bring some clarification in that. This is one of the things that just attracted me to reach out to you in the first place, what you do. And this has been something that I've had to do my entire life. Started as a young child with unlearning all of the things we have to. And this is part of the process of healthy individuals having healthy conversations to build healthy relationships, is clearing the air and addressing hard things without attacking, without vilifying, without destroying character. This is how it should be done. And it's really an honor to be able to do something like this on the air. It clears so many different things, because that comment left unaddressed can take people in all kinds of different ways. But when we bring it back and address the collateral issues with it, it helps calm all those things down. And it should really encourage people to go listen to it, because our conversations have been extremely dynamic and completely candid, with no planning in them whatsoever. So we've covered a lot of subjects very candidly. And that's not an easy thing to do with anybody. And it started within the first minute of conversing. Which I think is a really, really a good thing. It's a good measure of character to take two people who you don't know where they're coming from necessarily, but you have these open, candid conversations, and you can lay things like this on the table.
Absolutely. Let's move on to the second thing that came up for me when we were talking about the biology of the fluidity of gender. And I pondered a lot about our conversation on this. So I want to state my thoughts and feelings about this. And then, regardless of how it came out or how I interpreted it during the interview, I'd love to hear your thoughts and opinions about it afterward. Okay?
Okay.
Okay. So I saw a pastor speak, and he said that God was non-binary, that he did not have just night and day, that in between night and day, there was sunrise and twilight and high noon. There was no definitive place between land and sea, that there was the beach, there was the marshes, there were wetlands, that birds could fly, but some could swim, and some fish could fly through the air. We have a spectrum. And before we hit the record on this very conversation, we were having a conversation about the beauty of the depth of colors that are out there, and how so many different shades and tones can set a mood and a feeling and create a whole new life. And that to me is what happens when our our chemistry, our biology is not in a exact set point. It is fluid. It is movement. And even somebody who identifies as me, I identify as a female. I'm biologically with female parts, but I spend a lot of my life living within my masculine energy. I know that I became very sick because I allowed my estrogen to get very low living in a patriarchal society and trying to live with high testosterone. Because that went so far against who I naturally am, I became sick. But it also showed me the fluidity of how these traits manifest based on how our hormones, how all of that is fluid. It is not binary. And there is masculine and feminine in every human being.
It's interesting listening to you talk, because I remember we were talking, I'm not sure if this is when we were talking about the conception context, because I'll bring something up and then I'll clarify something else. Because we were talking about, I think you said you had heard that it was the male contribution that allowed implantation and the growth of the fetus and all that. When we look at nature in general, not everything is sexual. Flowers commonly have both sexes in them. It's pretty common in most of the plant matter that both sexes exist in a significant amount of the plants. Some are sexual, not all, but some are. And it's interesting, you look at fruit trees and they need a mate of the same variety to pollinate. Apple trees are pretty classic as far as that goes. And okay, that's interesting. Most of the animal kingdom is either male or female. I don't know of any incidents where that's not the case, but there are some formations that have both, and it's typically called hermaphrodites and things along that line. When doctors run into that at a birth, it's much easier for them to make that child a female than it is a male. And oftentimes they will make that choice when that child is just an infant, just recently born. And that's not correct. They should do some genetic issues to figure out what they are and whatever. But when we look at the production of hormones that does everything, I was reminded of this one study that I thought was really interesting. They got, I don't know how they collected 2 fertilized eggs. They opened up the abdomen of two males, and they dropped an egg in, both of them. Obvious baby was growing inside there. The belly came out. 9 months later, they did abdominal surgery, and they took these healthy fetuses out, healthy children out, which there's three different kinds of estrogens primarily. There's estradiol, which is a kind that a woman has primarily when she cycles. There's estrone, which is the one estrogen that's primarily made in the peripheral tissues. And that's the one I haven't seen any studies on if that's the primary one that a young girl has before puberty, but it is the primary one that's left after menopause. And that's primarily made in the peripheral tissues, not the ovaries. And thinking about that study with the two males where they dropped the fertilized egg in, I was thinking about that, and this isn't studied either, but the inference is that the estriol, the pregnancy hormone, is made from the womb, but it appears it's made from the fetus. And it's the fetus that does all the nurturing, all the growth. Otherwise, those would not have grown in the abdomen of the two men.
Yeah.
So it's very, very, very interesting with that. So it's the coming together of the two seeds, the egg and the sperm, that create a life that, like a plant, it creates its own root system. That root system in a mammal is a placenta, which attaches to a rich environment of blood flow. And that happened inside of a male's abdomen, which is really kind of bends your mind a little bit into what we traditionally think and we believe, but all that. But when we look at the production of the primary sexual hormones, pregnenolone and DHEA are the precursors to all those hormones. Those are made by the adrenal glands. Those get converted into both male and female. Our sexual organs are the same. They just move to different place. If the child is a male, at about 7 weeks after conception, there's a little shot of testosterone, and all the female parts move to a male location. Up till 7 weeks, they're identical. You can't tell other than chromosomes. But with that small shot of testosterone, the ovaries grab the round ligament that holds a reproductive system in place in a woman, drop down through the inguinal canal. They drop into the labia. The labia become the scrotum. The ovaries become the testicles. The round ligament becomes the spermatic cords that go on. And then the three erectile tissues in a woman, they just come together around the urethra and elongate. And there you have the difference in the sexual organs. Within the tissues, the pregnenolone and DHA, it converts in both male and female to progesterone first. Progesterone converts into testosterone, and testosterone converts into estrogens in both men and women. And there are some hormones in fat. What's it called? It starts with an A. I don't remember what it's called. I probably aromatase. Aromatase. It takes the male testosterone and converts it into toxic estrogens. And it'll take women's estrogens and convert those into toxic testosterone. But it's more effective on a male than it is on a female as far as that goes. And what awakens the aromatase in the fat tissue is cortisol, stress. When stress is released, the cortisol levels rise up, and those are your adrenal hormones. So there's cortisol, adrenaline, and several other ones. Norepinephrine and epinephrine are the most powerful of all those. But one of the things they do is they liberate amino acids out of the protein structures, mostly the muscle. Those get liberated in the bloodstream. Those go in the liver and get converted very quickly into blood sugar. And the blood sugar, it just climbs sky high because it's designed as a response for us to have explosive energy to save our lives from life-threatening situations. But in modern society, we have these chronic levels of that aren't life-threatening, they're just gut grinders. And whenever that happens, insulin follows to push it into the tissues, and that's where excessive fat gets made. It's those two together. Whenever you have cortisol, you have the liberation of the amino acids. With that converting into blood sugars, they start reaching for the sky like a rocket, trying to go like that. And insulin just tries to push it in because too much blood sugar is very toxic. It can kill us. It can do all kinds of very destructive things. And that very action takes those hormones and turns them completely upside down with all that. So, it's interesting when we look at the physiology of all that stuff with what's going on. It's a verification of what you said. We have, all of us, we have circulating levels of all three of those hormones. Women tend to have more estrogens, but not always. And men tends to have more testosterone, but not always. And those are some of the factors that are part of that.
Yeah.
That you can't argue with. I mean, that's just basic physiology.
And it is the gray areas where, because we are really biochemical machines, that creates the variations. Just like color is the middle spectrum between black and white. Black being
Yeah.
all colors and white being the absence of color. And life is in the middle of it. And that's the way I see gender. That's the way I see sexuality. And that's the way I see each of us individuals within our purpose, that we are not binary creatures. We are not just one thing identified by culture or society or tradition. And that we are evolving into a place where self-identity and self-expression is personal empowerment and is being called forward in the evolution of our world. We are now evolving into the next greatest version of us as human beings.
It's interesting when you put it in that way. You look at different interactions within societies as a whole. It is empowered people that have the freedom to express themselves without judgment. And it's the biases that we have that want to scream for judgment when something is laid on the table that's contrary to our own experiences. And
Well, don't you believe that that is a fear response? That is
it
a fear of the unknown, and it is part of our central nervous system, putting us into sympathetic, either fear, flight, fight, or fawn.
it's interesting you bring that up because I've talked about reflexes in ways that a lot of people don't realize. We have all kinds of reflexes within ourselves that they're designed for self-protection. And you look at the knee-jerk one, that's so that if you step on something sharp, the that knee caves away and makes it so you don't puncture your foot. We've got those into our soul, and they protect different belief systems. They protect all kinds of different things. Some of those are just not necessarily even thought of. They're just knee-jerk responses. Fear is a great manipulator. It's one of the easiest ways to manipulate anyone, and it takes a lot of training to not respond to that in a knee-jerk way.
I need to challenge this point because
Okay.
I believe that fear has been marketed because the marketing and our culture, our society, our structures understand that it is a primal reflex. It is a safety thing that will drive our behavior. And it has been used as a way of putting us into a place to control the behavior. But in today's society, fear means, and this is what part of Unlearn the Crap is for me. So, from my perspective, fear means you're off autopilot. Pay attention, make a decision. And so, when we have that fear response, if we don't go into our auto programming, if we don't go into a sympathetic response, if our vagus nerve does not get stimulated, and we just come to attention and say, it's time for us to take the wheel. It's time for us to decide where we're going, what we're going to do. It's just a warning signal.
That's well said. And in what I was talking about, I didn't bring up the marketing issue, but that is an absolute reality that it is one of the easiest ways to manipulate people. You find that in the medical community in a huge way, what they call fear mongering.
Yeah.
Uh, it's very, very, very easy to manipulate people with that. Not all of our responses are done by that directly. And it is one of those things, like what we're having a discussion right now. When one of those responses comes out, it is one of those chances of going, okay, where did that come from? Did
Yeah.
I did I did I did I really process that properly? Did I state that properly? How can we address that
Yeah.
and get out of that response pattern and bring it into an open dialogue? You look at different societal roles. One thing that I think is really a beautiful thing is people that are empowered enough to have a voice.
Yes.
And you look at that's something that you are expressing right now. And it's a wonderful thing when people have a voice and they're given the liberty to have a format because their beliefs, their opinions, the way they process is ex- it's extremely important. And to be able to do this in an open forum, just being raw and vulnerable, is such a healthy thing to demonstrate how these things really should work.
Yeah.
Not taking reflexes and protecting, but to have open dialogues where we dissect what's going on and remain open and vulnerable, not closed,
Yeah.
but just to
And
have
that,
open conversation.
yeah. And that begins with each and every one of us challenging our own thoughts, seeing how true and aligned they are with who we are now. Because just like we outgrow different stages of our lives, we're no longer the same person we were in kindergarten when we start high school. We're no longer the same person when we get married and have children. We're no longer the same person when we hit our 60s, our third act. We evolve and we change. And so, if we can take a look at some of the responses and thoughts and beliefs that we may have carried for a long time, one of the examples I like to use is our computer systems. When I first started learning how to use a computer, DOS was what I learned it on. And we are now living in a smart world. There is no way that our phones and computers and satellites and everything else that we're living with could survive on a DOS system. And it became outdated. And so, if we begin by challenging our own thoughts, wondering, is this true for me today? Does this empower me today? And accept the fact that nobody else needs to agree with our individual thoughts and feelings and beliefs. We don't impose our thoughts and beliefs on someone else, and we allow them to have their own, because when we are all aligned and we're not in judgment and we're in full acceptance of the differences, the variations, I don't believe that war and hatred and prejudice can exist if we are all living our true, aligned, empowered selves.
It's an interesting statement. I'm not sure how much the world you've traveled. I've traveled quite a bit in some different time zones. Getting into Eastern Europe and Russia as the Berlin Wall was coming down was a very, very eye-opening experience. And I was in there 2 years after that and a couple of years after that again. Spent quite a bit of time over there. It's an interesting thing when you interact with the common people of all these contrary cultures. We would all easily get along because we all have the same desires.
Mm-hmm.
We want to live peaceably. We want to have our own plot and have the ability to live life as we feel directed without the impositions of um, abusive powers,
Mm-hmm.
trying to manipulate societies to be at arms with each other. You look at some of the different times, I don't remember which World War this was. It was either the first or second. It was Christmas Eve. The Germans were on one side, the Americans were on another, and somebody somewhere started singing Christmas carols. It was joined by a chorus of both sides. They laid down their arms, they met in the middle, and they had Christmas together. Their commanders were outraged at what went on, just outraged. And the next day it was war as usual. But that is one of the most powerful demonstrations of what you just said.
Yeah.
We all want to live in peace, and it's these people with perverted ideas to foster all this contentiousness. And it's if you have much experience with narcissistic behavior, things like that, that's just the epitome of what that is. There's personalities we cannot ever make peace with. And we got to be at rest with that.
Mm-hmm.
Just because they're just too evil to be able to make peace with, and they're too evil to be in close company with.
But that is the beauty of our world in polarity, that
Mhm.
to have beauty, we must have the beast. To have deep, beautiful love, we must have evil. Everything has its polar opposite. it will exist. It's where we put our focus. It's where we put our energy.
It's how we choose to interact. And it's those who have learned through the furnace of afflictions, those are the ones who learn how to interact in a much healthier way to clarify these unspoken of or unthought of or incomplete ideas, to bring them to the table and come to mutual respect and mutual interaction. That's beautiful.
Yeah. And that could not have articulated the purpose of Unlearn the Crap and the mission that I'm on and the paradigm shift that I see our world coming in. I see us in massive paradigm shift with AI and all these other technologies coming and replacing manual labor. Just the other day, I saw an article on how farming in Canada is now being run by automation, robotics, and AI to grow lettuce by controlling the conditions to make sure that we have more than enough lettuce in an indoor environment. That frees each and every one of us to rise up, level up, to be the best version of human that we are. But when we hold on to the roles and the identity that it is my job or their job to grow, pick, and it must be done in this way, when we're not co-creating and keeping abreast of the changes that we are all experiencing, then that is where we are moving towards. And when we hold on to the past and we hold on to outdated thoughts and paradigms that no longer serve the individual or the collective, that's where we create hate and prejudice and fear. And I see this happening all over our world. Dr.
It,
Brad, I am so grateful that you had this conversation with me today. I'm so grateful that you gave me the opportunity to say, this made me uncomfortable, and gave me an opportunity to challenge your thoughts, which gave you the opportunity to articulate your true feelings, which allowed us to see our commonality.
yeah, it's a beautiful process, and it will be with good-willed individuals. And adversity is one of the greatest tests to see on whether someone is or not.
Yeah. And I'm afraid for those people who are trying to cling to an outdated system, because our world is not going to slow down. Evolution is not going to reverse. We live in an expansive universe that is ever expanding. And when our hearts and our minds and our souls expand and we align, that's where we're creating and co-creating. Thank you for this conversation.
Yeah, it was an honor and a pleasure to do this. And it's an interesting thing in demonstrating healthy vulnerability, because I really believe this type of conversation is a model of what those dialogues should look like. Not rising up to accuse or exert power over anything, but to bring something to an open dialogue so you can clear the air about things. It's a healthy way to interact. And not many of us have examples of that. This is a public example of navigating some very, very touchy, very difficult situations. And I think we did a very good job doing it.
I think we did too. And I'm so grateful that we both rose and leveled up to this opportunity. And may this conversation help others challenge the angers that pop up, because when we go inward, we find our truth. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me for a very special episode of Beyond the Interview with Dr. BradMontagne. There were a lot of topics that we did not necessarily touch on, but this is your opportunity to watch the full interview tomorrow, see how it went, and capture when you have a reaction, something that hits you viscerally, hits you in the gut, positive, negative, it doesn't matter. And use that response as a clue that your soul is talking to you. And go and challenge your thoughts. Take a look at the different opposing perspective. Does this still empower you? Does this work for you? Or is this a time to make a new conscious choice? We are all here to level up. And the beauty of this conversation was it showed that we can have differences and we can resolve them in a way that honors each and every one of us. We can do conflict differently. We can look at different perspectives and see other sides and make a choice. Thank you for being a part of this. I encourage you to subscribe, like, share, and please, especially, comment. Tell me what was brought up for you. Let's start a dialogue where we do it with respect and honor and full personal alignment and empowerment. I hope you enjoy this whole week series. Until next time. Thank you for joining me on this episode of the Unlearning Curve. I hope you enjoyed it. If something landed for you today, make sure to follow, like, comment, and share, and check out all the other full interviews and other episodes of Unlearn the Crap and Level Up podcast, where you'll find deeper conversations, expert guests, and real stories from people just like you who are unlearning their crap and choosing clarity. Visit me at kathybaldwin.me and get all my free resources. Check out my coaching programs as well as my books. Until next time, keep showing up, keep unlearning, and keep leveling up, because your soul is calling.